So your keynote this morning was titled "Containers Will Not Fix Your Broken Culture." I'm curious, what was your inspiration for that talk?
I think I work at a vendor now, and I go into a lot of organizations that are excited about their replatforming or their platform initiative or their containerization strategy. Um, and they think that that will fix everything. And I'm in a meeting with the head of application development, but the head of ops is not there because they don't want to be in a meeting with the head of application development. And I think this is not going to go well. Like, your plans to use great technology that's going to enable your organization to move faster are going to be hampered by the inability of people inside your organization to work with one another. And so after seeing that in action a few times, and of course having my own experience with the fact that containers are not in and of themselves a panacea, I thought I would maybe poke at that hype cycle just a little
I
bit.
see. Should people be using containers
Yeah.
more generally?
Absolutely they
Yeah.
should. Like, I remember the bad old days of the, I hope this upgrade works, and then just back that off to, I hope I can get back to the way things were. And not ever having to live through that again, or the inconsistent state that could happen if you have some agents that run somewhere, and you don't really know what state production is in, and then you have to start querying it with the SSH and the for loop to find out exactly what is out there. I mean, no one should have to suffer through that. We have the technology, like, we can make this better.
Yeah.
And so definitely people should be using containers. I think that it's important to realize when you're using them, though, that there's a lot of ways that you can use them responsibly that aren't necessarily covered in the cute whale and the myth of like, build, ship, run right from your laptop. Everything will be fine. Just
Yeah.
YOLO that stuff out into production.
Push button.
And it's like, well, I mean, the push button should be on your CI system. Like, your CI system should be the only one pushing images into your, Docker registry or equivalent. Like, that's how you can ensure that you can repeat that process next time. I mean, if you think of how a Docker file works, there's from some base image, then there's apt-get, install, all sorts of things without a version. And then there's add all this stuff in my CWD that I didn't check into source control. Like, can you imagine shipping that image out to production and running the container based on that?
Yeah.
And then the developer's laptop, goes up in metaphorical flames, and then you're like, how do we reconstruct this? Let's go tear that, Docker file, which isn't magic. Again, it's basically a tarball. Let's go tear that apart. And it's like what you actually need is the pipeline that lets you produce the container images consistently, repeatably. Because, I mean, like, the joke's been going around Twitter, right? Like, OpenSSL, the gift that keeps on giving. If you're going to be shipping images with a large attack surface of a full operating system, not that containers require that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, of course, like, there's Alpine Linux. You can have stripped down images. There's what we were doing at Drama Fever is putting statically linked Go binaries into the Scratch container so that we could ship, just 10 meg of just the binary. But that requires, again, a consistent pipeline with things like builder containers with all the dependencies to create the shippable image, that version deployable artifact that, yes, you do want, but it's not sufficient to running containers well. Like, there's that big gulf, like that funny tweet of Michael Ducey's that's been in a couple of talks so far at this conference about, the idea of containers. Yeah, you have Docker, that's super. Containers in production, you have to care about your logging, your monitoring. You're probably not going to be able to set up a bunch of static checks that just look at some IP address, because we're in that ephemeral world of continuous partial failure at that point.
And it's not purely a technical problem. I think it's something you were getting at with your talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you think about it, containers, Andrew Clay Schaefer at Pivotal likes to say that containers are a good, anything really that works between teams can be a good boundary object.
Yeah.
But having that, delineation of responsibilities is a good thing. Having the ability to say, this is the code that we're going to ship with the code and the dependencies that we're going to ship in one package. And if we change it, we're going to replace, not upgrade, but we're going to replace that package. That's good. It doesn't solve the fact that somebody needs to decide where that base image is coming from, who's going to curate it, who's going to control the pipeline, what you're going
Human
to actually,
decisions.
what you're going to allow a group to ship or not ship. There's a lot of, as you can imagine, there's a lot of negotiation and discussion and decision making in there, and these aren't technical problems. This is
Business
it.
decisions.
Well, it should be. And I think this is one of the problems that we run into in
Yeah.
tech is that we all get very emotionally invested in the choices that we've made and the reality that we've constructed in our minds and then started to instantiate through code.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where people's incentives get misaligned. If someone is really focused on shipping the new features and someone else is focused on the MTTRs and the SLAs, I mean, yeah, they're going to be at odds with each other if they're only focused on that local optimization and not focused on the shared goals of their whole organization. I mean, whether they're a business, trying to make money, or whether they're 18F trying to, serve the U.S. citizenry, either way, there are goals the organization has. And if everybody is first focused on those goals and then focused on the tooling and, cultural choices they need to make to achieve those goals, it's a lot more useful.
And that needs to be part of the conversation a bit more.
Yeah.
People talk a lot about enterprise cloud or container adoption. Do you see that actually being a big thing? A lot of large organizations starting to use containers?
I mean, some of the largest organizations out there, say Google, have been using containers for a long while. I do see a lot more large enterprises starting to think about containers now. The ones that seem to be successful with their container adoption are usually the ones that are using some sort of structured platform.
Yeah.
And I do tech advocacy for open source Cloud Foundry for Pivotal. That's not the only choice out there. There are many commercial and open source alternatives in the platform space.
Yeah.
Brian Gracely from Wikibon has done good write-ups of them over the last year. And so there's a lot of, neutral reporting out there that would advise you to look at choices that will help you, because the container in and of itself is not going to be a complete solution. And that said, DockerCon this week, Docker is announcing a lot more adding features to try to make the solutions from Docker a more complete solution. There's a lot of third parties, Kubernetes, Mesos, whatever in the space, trying to make it possible to use them. The large organizations that are starting to do work like that are usually using some kind of more composed platform or frameworks in order to obviate a lot of the glue code that you end up needing to have to write. The kind of stuff that when we were making our artisanal, hand-whittled platform at Drama Fever, we wrote a lot of Bodo and a lot of Janky Bash, because if anyone tells you that there's no Janky Bash in their homegrown platform, they're totally lying. There's Bash in there. They might have checked exit codes.
So some of your talk also touched on, sort of this tension between tools and cultural transformation. And you mentioned Conway's Law with that. I'm curious, from your perspective, has a tool ever solved a cultural problem?
I think solve is a strong word, but I would say that modern tooling that we have for things like code collaboration, I know everyone loves to give Git a hard time for being, as a former coworker of mine put it, user-surly, not so much user-friendly. But, I mean, the ability to have a pull request and collaborate on code line by line with each other, ubiquitous chat in organizations today. Well, of course, then people, say that, hey, before it was they wanted to declare email bankruptcy and now it's chat bankruptcy. But the ability to just paste some error messages or a screenshot to your coworker, as opposed to, maybe sending an email and then being frustrated, is, I would say that kind of tooling, faster, better collaborative work, definitely helps.
Yeah.
I mean, people still have to have the attitude of wanting to collaborate with each other to use it successfully, but it definitely...
They have to want to talk to each other.
But it definitely helps.
Yeah.
So.
Gotcha. Well, to finish off, I'm curious to hear from you what projects and people are doing interesting things at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, I'm going to have to check out all the stuff that just came out of DockerCon. It looks interesting. The fine folks at Joyent have this autopilot pattern that they've implemented with Container Pilot. This is a very lightweight, bundle your application and its dependencies, and then have the application be essentially self-aware, so that you don't spend so much time configuring things and storing the configuration outside the application. Very similar to what Chef is doing with their new Habitat project. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in the space right now. And of course, a lot of the stuff that we have going on with Cloud Foundry. I mean, the Cloud Foundry Foundation at cloudfoundry.org goes into a lot more detail about that.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian.